for such a marvelous performance. Really, just
you're welcome.
bravo. I'm Debra Davidson. I'm the director and founder of Catalyst Conversations, and I'm just delighted to be part of the programming for Precious Little. It's a little bit out of the ordinary for what we normally do. Catalyst Conversations brings together artists and scientists, and we usually do that at MIT, not in a theater setting. And usually people show images of their work, but we've just seen, 80 minutes of imagery, real imagery. So anyway, I'm delighted to have you here. I'm just so pleased to be partnering with the Nora Theatre Company and for this production. I want to thank Debra Wise for initiating the idea of inviting us to be part of the programming. And I'd like to thank the Cambridge Arts Council, our founding partner, and our advisory board and our volunteers who help us out. So to explain a little more, Catalyst Conversations was founded in 2012 to open a critical dialogue between the arts and sciences. And we present intimate and provocative conversations between artists and scientists and the public. We're interested in connecting the two through programs, educational outreach, and programs like this, which demonstrate the conversation and synergy between art, science, and technology. So this afternoon, co-chair of Catalyst Collaborative, Debra Wise, artistic director of the Nora Theatre Company, and lead actress, Mikeska Gardner, and Emerson College professor and speech-language pathologist, Joanne Lasker, will explore our capacity, our capacity for language, especially the ability to convey abstract and specific meanings across a variety of means of communication, which came up throughout the whole play: speech, sign, writing, and gesture. And so I was just telling Debra that is the embodiment of theater. I think we'll all have something to say. So each will bring to the conversation her unique point of view. So for Debra, I thought it'd be interesting to have her just share with us and with you working across disciplines with the Catalyst Collaborative at MIT. For Lee, her vantage point of being inside the narrative as the character who is a linguist, so that would be among the things that you might want to talk about. I think there's a lot to say. And then Joanne Lasker, whose interest and research is devoted to augmentative and alternative communication. So I'll just do the bios of the three people sitting here. Debra Wise, as many of you know, is the artistic director of the Underground Railway Theatre, which she co-founded in Oberlin with Wes Sanders. During the decades as a touring company, she helped create over 30 new works and tour them nationally and internationally to venues ranging from Lincoln Center to public schools. She led URT collaborations with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, the Museum of Science, the New Center for Arts and Culture, the Mary Baker Eddy Library, the MFA and the ICA, and the Cambridge Arts Council. Since creating Central Square Theatre with the Nora Theatre Company, she has focused on re-envisioning URT's mission to grow from within its first theatre home. She co-founded Catalyst Collaborative at MIT, which is a unique science theatre partnership with MIT, which is Precious Little is one of those plays. Mikeska Gardner is in her third year as the artistic director of the Nora Theatre Company. In that time, she has directed Her Aching Heart, Grounded, Saving Kitty, Arcadia, and performed in Emily. The Marchese de Châtelet defends her life tonight, earning an Elliott Norton Award for lead actress. She also played Claudia in the RIME-nominated Chosen Child at Boston Pirates Theatre. She has a BFA in the Performing Arts from George Mason University and an MFA in acting from Catholic University. And Joanne Lasker is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at Emerson College. She received her master's at the University of Amherst and her doctorate at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in speech-language pathology. Her clinical research focuses on assessment and treatment protocols for people living with aphasia, and which we'll talk about, and other acquired communication disorders. So with that, we'll begin. And what I'd like to do is have each person talk a little bit, and then we'll talk together. And audience, you too. Welcome to join us. So I'm really excited to start this conversation. And as I mentioned, this is very much out of the ordinary for what we normally do. You're each going to describe your interests, and for Joanne, your research. And for today, we're all inside the world of language and science, and I think that's a good way of getting us going. And I just want to mention that my contribution is just to kind of get it going and to catalyze things. So,
all right.
Yeah. So, Debra, we'll start. I am, I love that you cross disciplines, and this project, Catalyst Collaborative at MIT, does that. And I know that there's been a range of subjects and characters explored with the many plays. And it would be interesting to know how this started for you and why you think this is important.
Sure.
That's just
Can you speak up a little bit? We cannot hear you.
Sure.
Especially when you face in that direction.
Okay, so sure. I'll speak out. We'll face this way. So obviously, we even share the name, right? Catalyst Conversations, Catalyst Collaborative at MIT. There's the shared idea is that there's extra meaning to be found at this catalyzing point, the intersection between these two disciplines. Catalyst Collaborative at MIT was founded out of a monthly salon, and one of the reasons I like to mention that is because I feel like we really need to return to a salon culture. Because it's so much fun. Alan Lightman, who was the first, some of you may have read his novels, yes? A few people are nodding. You may know that he is the first professor to hold a joint position in both science and humanities at MIT. He's a physicist as well as a novelist. And he and playwright Alan Brody co-founded what they just called, quite simply, Science on Stage Salon. And we met monthly during the academic calendar. I snuck in because I'm not a playwright. But it was really, the idea was to bring together playwrights and scientists with no agenda over wine and cheese and see what happened. And there were a lot of ideas that were generated. And I was thinking this morning about what those conversations actually produced. The ideas specifically that came out of those conversations led to these plays. Operation Epsilon by Alan Brody, which is about the internment of German nuclear physicists at Farm Hall in England at the end of World War II. Did some folks see that play? Yes, many people. From Orchids to Octopi, an evolutionary love story by Melinda Lopez, which is the only play that I'm aware of has ever been commissioned by the National Institutes of Health. Remembering H.M., which is inspired by the life of Henry Malaise, who lost his short-term memory after brain surgery, and he became the most studied patient in U.S. Medical history. Most of the research being done here at MIT by the late, great Suzanne Corkin. And both Einstein's Dreams and Mr. G, Play About the Creation, which are both adaptations by Wes Savick of novels by Alan Lightman. All those came out of just the idea to convene these conversations between scientists and artists. So what a good idea. And obviously very different themes, but they all reinforce an epiphany that I had during these salons that may seem self-evident to you, but wasn't to me. And that I feel is the engine that fuels this particular kind of collaboration, interdisciplinary collaboration. I always thought, and my father is a veterinarian, and my brother is a biologist. I always thought science was about the answers, and the art was about the questions, and that our job was to find the really great questions, and the scientist's job was to find the really great answers. But what I learned in these conversations is that actually what scientists and artists have in common in their job descriptions is that they have to be comfortable. Can you hear me back there? I heard somebody shifting. They have to be comfortable remaining in a problem space for a very long time without rushing to a solution. And it's not that we don't want solutions, or we don't want answers, or we don't want meanings to accumulate. We want all those things to accumulate. But for the answers / data / theories, meanings in the arts, perhaps that's a better word, to be truthful and of value, they need to be arrived at by one, articulating a rich hypothesis, which is essential and complex and engaging. Two, explore that hypothesis from a multiplicity of perspectives, with great attention to detail and with an attentiveness to the possibility, maybe even the expectation, rather, I should say, that you'll be surprised and that your basic assumptions will be challenged. So maybe a scientist wouldn't describe it that way, but I feel like there's a lot in common. Certainly there's more in common in our manner of investigation, our way of knowing the world, than I thought originally. And yet there's enough difference that it feels like there's a reason to come together and put these ways of knowing in dialogue. And I thought Precious Little was really a great example of that, at least the way I experienced the play, that our assumptions about language and its relationship to not only identity, but what it is to, what's valuable about a life, what's basic to vitality, to love. I felt like those assumptions, for me anyway, were sort of gently suspended, and so I could kind of look at them and turn them around, and they were called into question that way, poetically really, but definitely. And at the same time as Brodie's assumptions were challenged about her own life and her relationships and her relationship with the life growing inside her. So those are the thoughts I prepared, and it seems appropriate to shift the microphone to Brodie, right? Yeah. Okay, so what am I supposed to do?
Well, here's an idea, that you are the character of Brodie, so you're inside that narrative. And I thought it'd be interesting to hear your relationship with the gorilla,
Right,
which was much more manifest than I understood from reading reviews and the interviews, in my preparation.
Yeah.
I thought it was profound.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Good.
really. So that's a place to start.
All right, well, I'll talk about that. So let me just first say, first of all, I can listen to Debra Wise talk all day, where her mind goes and the way she articulates herself is so poetic and so beautiful to listen to, and I always learn something. Whereas I think I'm sort of like, if like
You were
Debra,
acting. I was sitting over.
well, but if you're out there theorizing about art, I'm like going, no, what's the practice of it? Not that you're not a practitioner, you are, but I'm like, I'm nuts and bolts, man. I do not think very conceptual. Well, I don't think conceptual. As a director, I can admit that. And as an actor, I certainly don't, because my job as an actor has to be that specific traveler in the moment all the time. Definitely always being prepared to be surprised. And that happens not only from the first rehearsal to the first time in front of an audience, but from that first time in front of an audience until that last performance. I always find new things in every performance, and I go, oh, that's what that's about. Oh my God, I never thought about that. And that is just because I'm practicing my job 6 shows a week. So the relationship in the show with the gorilla has really followed that. I mean, in the beginning, I too, when I'm reading the page, I'm going intellectually, I'm going, okay, there's a connection with the gorilla. I don't know what that means. I had not met Nancy Carroll before we started rehearsal, so I didn't even know, I didn't have a vision of her as the gorilla. And in the meantime, I'm thinking about all the other stuff I have to do. So I'm like, the gorilla, whatever. Okay, we'll get there when we get there. We'll get there when we get there. It'll happen. And it really wasn't until the first weekend of performances when we were all sort of in it together that I started to understand viscerally what I intuited intellectually. And it was the hardest relationship for me to sort of figure out, like, I get it by the end. Like, I understood the end, and I understood at the end that last monologue to the gorilla was really, I mean, obviously, like, I don't really walk into the gorilla's enclosure. So the gorilla becomes sort of an amalgamation of all the wise women in the play, all the women that Nancy plays. So Cleva, Dorothy, the older geneticist, the genetic counselor, and the gorilla sort of all melding into this wish for a connection with someone who is very basic, fundamental, isn't clouded by intellect and too much thinking, who has an organic approach to life, who is a place who can provide a place of just sort of safety in a way that Brody has never experienced before, I think, in her life. There's only like 3 lines that suggest that Brody lost her mother. I say my mother's dead, but in my own story, like I lost my mother young. So I didn't have that person who to guide me. And so I, as Brody, have channeled all of my survival instincts into work, into intellect, into things I can control, even into relationships that clearly I sort of have the upper status in, until this event happens. And even getting pregnant was a choice. It was an academic choice. It wasn't rooted in any real understanding of motherhood or parenthood. And so what I do often when I do a role is I look at what the journey is. So I start someplace, the character starts someplace and ends up someplace vastly different. And I don't always know what that journey is. I know often what the end is. That's always a lot of times really clear to me. So this is the end, right? Meeting this iconic mother figure, wise woman, safe place. So then if I backtrack the journey, that means I start out someplace very different. Proud of my intellect, grabbing onto my intellect, knowing certainty into what I know. And then the journey becomes, how does that break down? And it's mostly with the gorilla where I really go in skeptical. I even start going, what? Stupid experiment, not going to be interesting. To just the physicality of the gorilla, what she looks like, what her fur looks like, how she moves. And then there's a key point when the gorilla, where Nancy she gets up and she sort of does right? And Drea and I go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Which in my own head, this is really technical, and I'll stop talking in a second. But that's a real interesting key because it's an organic, visceral adrenaline rush that I don't think Brody has ever had before. So there's something about that adrenaline rush that unlocks cellularly something in her that allows the rest of the journey to proceed.
Beyond language.
Which is beyond language, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's sort of an understanding of how that relationship sort of developed over the course of the rehearsal period and now what you see in the course of the play.
That's fantastic. So, Joanne, maybe you can share with us what augmentative and alternative communication is as a practice. And as I said earlier, Joanne is not a linguist, she's a speech pathologist. So maybe you can parse that out for us. And then, a response or maybe one of the things we had chatted about before.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's so much to say, but anyway.
So I'm a speech language pathologist, and I'm also a professor at Emerson. And I'm sure people have heard the term speech therapist or speech teacher. Speech language pathologist is essentially the same thing, but we work across the lifespan. So I primarily work with people who have acquired communication disorders after stroke, who become what we call aphasic, who lose the ability to use their speech and their language to communicate successfully. Augmentative communication or augmentative and alternative communication are the tools that we use for people across the lifespan, not just adults but kids, to communicate when typical pathways for speech and language don't work. So when we have children or adults who have cerebral palsy, whose speech is hard to understand, or people who have lost the ability to access parts of their brain due to stroke or degenerative diseases. Those tools and technologies can be computer-based, like what was going on with the gorilla, with computerized lexicograms, but also low-tech strategies like sign or visual supports or strategies. So that's what I study, and I also work with clients who are facing some of those challenges. That actually is my research, working with those individuals. So the journey that Brody takes is exactly the journey that many of the families I work with have to take, which is the idea that how do I interact with a potential being or someone who doesn't communicate the way I expect them to communicate, the way that I assume they'll be able to interact with me, their identity. If your mother lost her ability to speak, how would you respond emotionally to that? And so that last monologue with you talking about the gorilla in the kitchen, essentially, I thought that is exactly what has come to be important that I see for many of the people I work with. What role can this individual assume where they're still themselves and still connected to me in some meaningful way? So the research I do is about ways to make that happen. And that might not be only through speech. That might be through gesture, or that might be through doing things together, like cooking in the kitchen together, because that's where we have that shared connection, like you said. And when you go and you curl up with the gorilla, that to me is saying there's that connection, despite the fact that we have or the character, the other actress, verbalizing while you're in the arms of the gorilla. And what's really meaningful there is that connection, and all that verbiage can just go, because that's not where the connection comes from.
So I think maybe we could just continue on that. Sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Sure.
No.
This actually, I think it's extremely stimulating, in many ways very fun play. It does pose some issues for me. And so I'd like to speak about that.
Yeah, sure.
Ask your perspective on it. For me, much of the play dealt with the failure of empathy, the failure of role-taking, of being able to take perspectives on what the other party is feeling. And one of my activities in many years is being an oral historian. And I have to deal with review boards that want to make sure that when you interview anyone, as in the case of linguists, that there has been communication about consent and what's involved and the risks that might be following. This is part of catalytic, if you will, science, and because there are a host of ethical and moral issues around interviewing, not just in therapeutic situations, but in anything a scientist, historian, psychologist engages in. And my dilemma watching that, as well as the other points of the failure of perspective taking, is that the various characters at no point, even in their personal relationships, seem to some point say, if I were in your shoes, I would completely feel the way you do. I would have loved to have linguists say to the daughter, the dilemma you're presenting is a very real one. I understand that dilemma. I'm torn myself. Did I have consent from your mother to participate fully in this? Did I have consent for maybe traumatic memories from the past that is going to be unearthed during the process of the interviewing? What are you going to do with this material? Are you going to keep these recordings? Are they going into an archive as a public? Am I going to get some money for having shared this information with you? I mean, there are so many questions that I felt, as someone who's done this work, were not brought up in any way in the play by the writer, as I asked the writers here, nor, and I'm just saying that as one example, nor the issue of what it is if you're really engaged in an intersubjective connection, whether it's the doctor and the radiologist or whatever that person is, that needs a communication based on perspective taking or empathy or whatever word you want to use in the best sense. And so I don't know how you dealt with it. So what I want to know is, as an actor, were you constantly, oh my God, I wish that the playwright had gone this further step. It needs
No.
a greater depth.
Yeah, I'll tell you, you're wanting a different play.
Okay.
That's a different play, and all those points are valid. That is not this play. In fact, though, to address your point, though, I actually think the main journey for Brody is, in the beginning, I don't think she's an empathetic person. I think you're absolutely right. Now, I'm going to assume in the world that we don't see that these legalities and the paperwork and all that stuff has been taken care of. I assume that she's a good scientist, she knows what she's doing, she's been doing this work a long time, she's working for some university that's keeping her checks and balances. So I just take that as backstory. It's not important to the play itself. I don't even think by the end of the story, by the end of the play, she's an empathetic character. I think her journey is that she starts to realize that she's not an empathetic person, and that has to be her story after the play. I think that's absolutely what this monologue is about, and that desire to curl up with the gorilla. So I think your observation is correct. I think that, and the conversation that might come out of it is correct. Not the detail that you want, because that's not what the playwright was trying to accomplish with this particular play, but your point of how empathy plays a role or doesn't in this. And I hope that if anyone thinks in those terms in the way you have, that you would see by the end of the play that the hope in the play is not even whether Brody keeps a child or not, which is not answered, but that she starts a self-awareness that she's never had before. And that to me is a hopeful and exciting journey for someone who has been locked in their own unique and singular perspective.
May I just add one thing to that very quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Brandon Obunu, who is a biologist who happens to be on our board, when he first heard a reading of part of this play, he said what attracted him to the play was that it was the story of a scientist who was flawed. And he felt like he often saw plays in which there was a scientist like the hero, you know. Yeah. But being a practicing scientist himself, he was attracted to this different story. So
you made that very clear, though. I think I understood that part, that she wasn't seeing the full picture when she couldn't even express herself, breaking up with a girlfriend, and she even told her, "You should just express yourself." And it's ironic that she's a linguist and she couldn't really talk.
Right.
I think that was
Use the words.
clarified it.
Yeah.
She just had a tunnel vision, and she was expanding her horizon.
Just to respond, I think that was iterated.
Yeah.
That issue was iterated throughout the play, where
Right.
you're saying something, but you mean something else, or and.
So it was just ironic that she was a linguist and she had not a clear vision of her own.
Her own humanity, right? Like her own humanity is something that is tested and how did you phrase it? Is challenged and tested and revealed in the play. No, I'm sorry. I'm so used to moderating. You go right ahead.
I just have to speak up. I have a PhD in linguistics. I'm a former linguistic professor from the University of Michigan. I've done hundreds of hours of field work. There's about a standard 2-page boilerplate form you ask the person to sign. Asking people to read words on a tape is not considered to be like asking them to engage in psychotherapy. There is, human subject oversight that approves the form, and you tell them whether they're going to get paid, and you tell them who's going to have access to the recording, but you don't expect that you're going to be inflicting major trauma, and that, so it's not that big of a deal, is what I'm saying.
And I do think, I'm sorry to interrupt, but one of the points is that when you bring up those words, right, I think that was the point here, that the elicitation of a first language means more than just the words on the clipboard, right? So what then comes up are all of these memories about the life.
Well, that's what I wanted to make a further point
Yeah,
about.
go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but
No, please
what
go.
I really liked was how well and authentically the play handled linguistics. You could tell, I think, that there must have been a few linguists in the house that the line, "Oh, you're a scientist. I thought you were a linguist." What I loved was, I think, in a lot of cases when people deal with language, it's really easy and facile to create an artificial division between, language is just empty verbiage, and genuine human connection is when you drop all that bullshit and just hug. And what I thought was this play was doing something much more subtle, where in the figure of the woman with the first language. So here, I'm sorry I interrupted, but I want to actually piggyback
Go
on your
ahead,
sentence.
yeah.
That she was showing the language can be a genuine connection with something unbelievably deep. And when your character said, use the actual words, there was in other words, I thought the play was constantly having an interplay between there's bullshit language and there's genuine connection language. In addition to, there can be nonverbal connection as well. It was like a whole spectrum.
And could I, adding on to what you're saying, 'cause I was thinking about this after seeing it the third time last night. So we hear Cleva counting, and we know that in the real world, at least this is my understanding, and you tell me if this is not the way you think the world of the play works, but what she's really doing is counting. She has the memories about those beautiful images, cranberries with crystallized sugar and all that. She's having the memories. She's not sharing them with Brody. So Brody's hearing the counting.
Yes.
And the daughter then witnesses that she's agitated, right? But she's the only one who's actually had these memories. And I don't know, I find that I thought that was masterful, the way somehow the playwright was able to do that, to show us multiple perspectives at the same time and get us more deeply into Cleva, and yet we're also entering more deeply into Brody. Anyway, and it makes it more heartbreaking when we hear that Cleva doesn't get to go back.
And that the daughter, instead of going, what has gotten stirred up? Could we talk about it? Could you teach me about your village? Is just going, we got to get this under control. We got to shut this down.
And last night I spoke with a woman who also, her parents were immigrants, and given your profession, you probably deal with that quite a bit. That resonated with her. She said, I was always taking care of my parents. And so I'm very attentive to...
I just want to bring up, I never talk in this way, but I just want to bring up something very personal, which is I'm the daughter of an immigrant. So my whole life, and she lived a long life and she was fine and whatever, but I always felt like I was translating the world for her. I sort of live in that world of like making the equivalent of like, this is how I say it, this is how you would say it here. And I love that I had that experience, and I feel like I sort of do that in my life. Anyway, that's just an aside. Yeah, sure.
This is not exactly a catalytic comment, but I just wanted to say how much I was brought to tears by the brilliance of all three actors in this play. And I think there's probably a way to connect it to communication, but it was partly also the play, the fact that you get to inhabit all of these different roles, and the way that you just seamlessly move from one to the other was just so beautiful. And I also wanted to say something about what you were saying, because you had a very close parallel to the character's experience, but I took care of my mom for 7 years after a stroke, and she developed vascular dementia, and she, I felt like I was translating the world for her, at the same time as I valued what was going on in her brain, which was very rich, and just as rich as the kinds of memories that Cleva was having. And so I could really relate to what Cleva's daughter was going through, because she was trying to keep the food on the table and keep her mom well, and at the same time just totally not being able to experience the beauty that was in her mother. But thank you so much for this beautiful performance. It was just incredible.
You're welcome.
I have to say, I had some trepidation. I mean, I was eager. I came because I said, my goodness, it's written by a woman. I made a resolution to see more plays written by women. And it's about a linguist. We have to go. But I had some trepidation, like, okay, how's the linguistics really going to be? It was great. It was wonderful.
Madeline George, one of her degrees, I think before she became a playwright, studied linguistics. So she knows her stuff in this case, yeah.
Actually, I'm wondering how you were thinking. I got to ask you kind of the speech Brody gives about how language is a window into what makes us human, and Brody's throwing out a lot of technical vocabulary, and it made perfect sense to me And I was right there with her going, yeah, yeah. But I'm wondering whether you are feeling like, oh, it's supposed to be partly opaque, or it's supposed to be like Rhodey's getting too full of herself and just, doing technobabble. Maybe I heard it differently than what you were, I don't know.
No, I don't think it's supposed to be opaque. I think in that particular speech, I start technically explaining why this particular language is so unusual. And we spent a lot of time looking at words she didn't know, like, Ugric and superstraits and vowel harmony and things. And just in the natural, I do think, again, in some backstory, Brodie knows how to do this because she has to write grants. She has to get grants.
Yeah.
So I think the spiel getting into why language is important. I think I mean it. I absolutely mean it. But I also think that's a way for her to appeal to the funders as well. This is why you should fund this language, not just because it's dying out. It's about to become extinct, but because when we lose it, we lose a way of understanding how we are as human beings. So the arc of that makes perfect sense to me.
Cool.
Yes.
It almost feels like she's desperately seeking something in the language, something that she doesn't even quite know what she's missing in a way, and that she's finally seeking silence. She's seeking something primal in something she cannot explain, like this life, even if it's a life that she may not be able to talk back to her, that she can't explain why she's so connected to it. It's like she's finally in something that cannot be explained in language. She's found this primal thing that she's been looking for, and it has to do with silence, something that she can't talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
I was struck by when she was talking about the gorilla, she's saying it's nouns, where are the verbs? And I think we often name things, but I think when you're talking about your character going on a journey, you're going from the naming the nouns to the verb, to the action, to the symbol of, just the hug at the end. It's not just the words, it's the actions that come with it.
When we teach a language, we start by, kids start with nouns primarily, but until they get verbs into their development, things can't really begin to move, right? So the development just begins to grow by leaps and bounds when they get action words. And so when we're teaching a language, that becomes very, very important.
Yeah, I know that I also had a language that I learned. My first language I stopped speaking when I was 5, and and I had the same experience of the words, words from Latvian triggering childhood memories, and also the fact that when I have an enormous number of very concrete nouns and about 3 verbs.
Right.
So I
I actually have a question for you, Joanne. So how does that play into how you deal with someone who has an aphasic
Right.
person?
Well, so one of the things that happens is aphasia is, as imagine that tip of the tongue phenomenon that we all have, but to extreme, right? So very frustrating for people who live it. And so what we do is we want to give them access to ways to communicate ideas and concepts where they might circumlocute around a word to try and describe a word or embody it physically. And I've had people with aphasia they've been able to say one thing sort of stereotypically, but in a variety of meaningful ways. So I had a client who once said devande, and that was all he could say. And he would say devande, 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 and there would be actual meaning behind what he was saying, but that was all he could get out of his mouth. So the point is, we try to use both the speech and language as a vehicle, as well as every other method. Once we can teach verbs, we get a lot of mileage out of them, because verbs can go a long way. The people with aphasia I work with lose the grammar. They lose the syntax of how to put words together. But if we can get a few good nouns and verbs there, we can get a lot of communication going.
Yes, sure.
So I have a condition called aphantasia that limits me to, and it's only been named last year, so most people don't know, which I have no visual memories, I have no spatial awareness, so forth and so on. And I have a friend who is an artist, and once she found out what I told her, she said, "Oh, this is so great, you don't have all this garbage to remember all these visual memories. This is why you remember how your teacher taught you in 2nd grade, and this is why you can still explain this, because it doesn't occupy." And she's been doing it all along in every conversation I had with her, presenting me a second side. That I did not feel bad to begin with, because I try not to feel bad about things I can't control, but that actually makes me feel good. The reason I brought it up is not to talk about myself, but to remind everybody how important it is to see things from both sides, especially since this theater is so closely affiliated with an educational institution like MIT. What I'm hearing that, for example, and you can disagree with me violently, and I think emotionally you could be overwhelmed and not hear intellectually what I'm trying to say. But whoever wrote as the dogma that empathy is good? I'm not absolutely sure that being empathetic is good in this life. And the problems that I see, we do not allow for even that type of discussion. Just like when the language disappears, why is it absolutely sure that it's bad, or is the world as we know it, since we don't know other planets, acquiring less of obscure and more of a common language, be it English or whatever?
That's a really interesting question, I think. And so we've had some experts here in some poster discussions before, and a couple things have come up just to sort of feed that idea. One is that, was the extinction of languages. So the extinction of languages and species on Earth, which right now is, as you cannot help but be aware of. I subscribe to National Geographic, and every issue there's another species about to become extinct.
But is it really bad?
Well, that's a question, right? Through time immemorial, things die out and things are reborn.
Evolution.
It's evolution. I think the big question these days, obviously, is our people. Our people. Well, that's the big one, right? And we're not going to talk about that today, because that's a whole other kind of conversation.
We don't have time today.
Our people, is humanity, the populace of the world, making it go faster? The other question that has come up, is this sense what you just said? So with language right now, are we in danger, and is it danger, of becoming a much more just homogeneous global, there's a noun I'm looking for, right?
But again,
entity,
is it anywhere said that this is definitely bad and we all agree to it? I understand that we live in Cambridge and we all think in exactly the same way.
But those are interesting questions, again, for another time. Like, what is the value of either diversity, in this case, language or species, versus a monolith?
In every conversation, we assume that diversity is great, that it's better than not. In every conversation, we assume, we don't even allow for another type of thinking. There is a reasonably famous MIT professor. His name is Richard Linson. I don't know if you know. He's emeritus now. He had a joint appointment between atmospheric science and...
No, you're talking about the
climate
change denier, right?
You can call denier in a negative way. You can call him anything you want. He's just as valid, if not any more valid, of MIT professor as anybody else.
Well, okay.
So I think I would like to table this because it's sort of off topic of the play. But you bring up really interesting, you bring up some questions, right, that deserve conversation.
Well,
as opposed to just assuming that there's the one answer.
And I absolutely agree that salons is an amazing thing, and I'm sorry they died out.
Let's start at the beginning.
Well, here we are.
Here we are, that's right.
Yes, and then you.
On a practical note, along with the stagecraft being brilliant, I thought the set was fantastic.
Oh, good.
And this is like a
transcriptions, I didn't hear any of those words particularly in the play, but those are phonetic transcriptions.
Oh, up on the wall?
Oh, yeah. So that's Uxtashat Kami.
Those are the phonetic spellings of the Kari language in the play. We had an Emerson person.
Yeah, Dan
do it.
Kempler, who was professor emeritus from our department, put those words up. So I didn't actually hear those particular words spoken by anyone in the play, but it seems like that would fit with the Kadi language. And these are all little individual phonemes. So and then this in the middle is a spectrogram. So they don't spell out anything in particular that I understand, but they're all sounds.
Well, it was very cool.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, is the language in the play based on an actual language?
It's a couple languages mushed together.
Okay.
What Nancy Carroll, who says all of those words, when she was looking it up, said, this is really weird. It starts out like this. Actually starts in the Congo, and so this part of this language starts in the Congo, and then it sort of trails its way up to Siberia. So I don't, what is this? And then we have been in touch with Madeline George. I don't think she's coming to see the show, but we were in touch with her. And it's a language she created based upon some real, like the body counting thing is true of some cultures. So it's based upon real languages.
Thank you.
Right, and I actually, all the transcriptions are different cases of a root. So you can see that there's some of the phonemes that occur again, like that shatkamni is at the end of all of those little words, and those are all declensions, like or different cases of, if you were going to make up a language, you'd have first person, second person, third person, that kind of thing.
Yes.
One takeaway for me was, I don't know who said this, but it has to do with the destruction of green things and then planting a specific species so that we have a green desert. So we have trees that are growing and they're there and they're beautiful, but we're wiping out the diversity we were speaking about before on the planet. And I made that connection with the language because the language of business, which is English, which we're all experiencing, is a very direct, instructive, let's make a machine. What's your last name? Smith. It must come from a blacksmith. My last name is Turner. That's somebody that makes something on a lathe. Our children were given Hawaiian names. We live in Hawaii. All our children were born in Hawaii. And we asked some native Hawaiian, wonderful friends of ours to give them Hawaiian names. Now, we named our children Daniel and James and Rebecca and my wife's father and things like that. And they gave our children's names like Kamea Makamahuli Olehia Ikapoli Ohina. And that means unexpected treasure. It was a gift from the moon goddess Ina, right? And so that was my first experience in understanding that language is a detailed communication tool between two people. If I say this is my son James, there's that connection. But if I say this is my son James Kalealoha, ring of love, now you're describing something about that person that tells more about them than just that direct. Am I making a point?
Yeah.
So I was in the film business in Hawaii, and we were doing this recreation scene of a Polynesian ancient village and whatever. So we had all these actors, and they wanted authenticity in the scene, so they
for sharing
I
that.
think we have time for one more question. Yeah, you were going to, or comment.
I'm just thinking about a
Or
lot, being a
comments,
man
yeah.
in the theater and a teacher of acting, these conversations is kind of what we do in our craft in a way, is of communication. So a couple of things, and it may be disparate, but wasn't there an experiment to create a universal language, Esperanto or
Yeah,
something
right.
like that?
Sure.
What happened to that?
You know, it's funny you should bring this up. Tony Kushner, I'm sure you all know Angels in America, if you don't know any other of his plays. Remember, he has a character in Homebody Kabul
Yeah.
who's becomes fluent in Esperanto, and he thinks
Yeah.
it's the hope of the future.
So, yeah, I don't know what,
I think it has totally, I mean, I don't think anybody, I think it's only a historic dream,
No,
right?
no. There is a convention of Esperanto that happens every year. This year it's happening in Finland.
There you go.
There's
So-
Wow, so interesting.
don't know how universal it is or whether it's even a good idea or not.
It's still,
But it leads me to this question.
it's still.
Is there a global universal language system of communication beyond spoken language that's in the world? And I say this in part because some of the more powerful moments in any piece of theater for me is beyond language. Are moments for which language fails what's really going on.
Yeah.
When you
I don't know
travel,
how you would put into words that final image, going to that gorilla. I mean, it would be a poor attempt to try to explain that.
Right.
It was done in silence, but there was a communication happening there. So, I don't know what I'm saying. Except just to put that out there.
when you travel internationally for business, you get a lot of instruction about avoiding certain gestures because they mean different things.
Yes.
But it seemed like it's both of that nonverbal communication that's so primal and important, but also I thought the most poetic moment was when she was remembering through counting the specifics of that language. It was just poetry,
That was
and that was just so moving. And it's like, there's one thing that binds us all together, but on the other hand, we don't want to all be alike. I mean, how boring is that? And how much do you lose from that? We don't want to have the same personalities and the same.
I guess just to speak to the diversity bit, I think that each dyad creates a language together. So each person talking to another person, there's a different set of rules and constraints that occur, and this means this when I touch you this way. And it's based on our relation, it's based on how well we know each other, it's based on our culture. And I think that there's endless diversity in that, and it includes language and goes beyond spoken language as well. So I see that maybe there's not one universal language like Esperanto, but I would say that every dyad, every family member I work with, for example, has to develop a new way of communicating with that person who's lost the ability to speak or never had the ability to speak. Does that make sense?
Remember when Michelle Obama touched the Queen?
So what did, you'll be our last.
Evolution is described as being very limited, and indeed evolution is both a destroyer and a creator. So when she is remembering and counting and enjoying the memory, we know that every day a new dialect disappears. And the same, ironically, that the gorilla should be the one who embodies the accumulated wisdom. It's also a metaphor of how we humans destroy that, because the gorilla itself is now an endangered species. And how do the scientists and the poets communicate about this? Keats said that they have to not reach irritably after certainty. And he faulted Coleridge as somebody who had to have the absolute answer. And the language of the aphasic is limited, but it can be poetic. But poets and scientists do not communicate. To most poets, the language on the backboard there not that I'm trying to deny that there are ways in which they can communicate, but that's a real...
But I think it's also part of only American culture, because in my language there is an expression, physicist-lyricist, because a predominant majority of reasonably well-known physicists, including Einstein, wrote poetry. I don't know if you know, but Einstein has a reasonably collection of poetry. There's something else I wanted to bring up is, because I'm reasonably bilingual, I think when you learn a new language, you learn, the enrichment does not come because you can learn to say table in two different ways. The enrichment comes because you learn new concepts. For example, in my language, there is no word for privacy, which is an incredibly important word in any English language. So when I was learning English, I learned a reasonably large concept of the culture as privacy, which is, sort of crucial, really, for our Waspish culture. And so maybe if we, if all the languages will come to, only English, it would have to incorporate all those, and we all will get enriched. Again, it's back to the same thing. There's positive, regardless of how thin the paper is, even if it's a saran wrap, you still have two sides to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think I just want to be conscious of time. I think we are at the end of our conversation. I want to thank our three speakers and you, audience, for great ideas and conversation, and I hope we join each other again. I just want to tell you that our next program, Catalyst Conversation, is going to be our annual STEAM event in collaboration with Cambridge Creativity Commons and the Cambridge Science Festival, and we're doing a program about the synergy between dance and science.
Nice.
So
where is it going?
That'll be at Lesley University College of Art and Design,
Amazing.
April 20th. Yeah.
But they can get on, people can get on your mailing list, right?
People can get on.
And
our
you'll
mailing list.
send
Thank you.
out the correct